AK, 9 German Shepherd couldn't save her drowning puppy. You won't believe who saved her. She was a hero on the battlefield, a legend among the canine units. But when it came to saving her own pup from the unforgiving river, even all her courage wasn't enough. Just as the current threatened to take everything from her, something unimaginable happened. A savior appeared from the most unlikely place, and what followed will restore your faith in miracles. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this straight to you. Stay with us until the end, because the truth about who stepped in to save that tiny life will leave you speechless. The air was heavy with the scent of summer rain as retired K-9 German Shepherd Roxy paced anxiously along the banks of Missouri River. Her sharp instincts, once honed for military missions overseas, now battled helplessly against the raging current before her. Just hours earlier, Roxy had wandered with her newborn pup, Max, through the wooded outskirts near the farm where she had been living in peaceful retirement. It was supposed to be a quiet morning walk, one final lesson in courage for her brave little pup before the storm clouds rolled in. But nature had other plans. In a flash, Max had stumbled too close to the river's edge. The slick mud gave way, and before Roxy could react, the tiny pup was swept into the cold, violent current. Panic surged through Roxy's chest like nothing she'd ever experienced. Not in combat, not in the line of duty. This was her own flesh and blood. And in that moment, all her years of training seemed useless against the raw, merciless force of nature. She lunged into the water without hesitation, her powerful legs kicking against the pull of the river. Her sharp eyes locked onto Max, his tiny head barely bobbing above the surface. As the current dragged him farther away, the rain began to fall harder, blurring her vision. She swam with every ounce of strength left in her aging body. But the river was relentless, a cruel enemy she couldn't outfight. With each desperate stroke, Max drifted farther. His tiny yelps grew weaker, swallowed by the roar of the water. And then, just as Roxy's legs began to tire and the shore seemed impossibly far, she saw something through the sheets of rain. Something she couldn't believe. A shadow moved along the opposite riverbank. A massive figure, golden and strong, dove fearlessly into the raging water. Roxy's heart stopped. It wasn't a human. It was a wild Mustang stallion. The powerful horse charged into the river with a grace and force that seemed impossible against the deadly current. His muscles rippled beneath his soaked coat as he fought toward the struggling puppy. Roxy could only watch, her body growing weaker, her vision narrowing as exhaustion claimed her. But before darkness took her, she saw the impossible. Max, her tiny pup, clinging desperately to the stallion's thick mane. As the magnificent animal turned and fought his way back to shore, Roxy collapsed against the riverbank, her head resting in the mud as her body shook with fatigue and fear. And then everything went black. A faint warmth touched Roxy's damp fur, pulling her back from the edge of unconsciousness. The world around her was still a blur, the sounds of the raging river replaced by softer, gentler noises, birds chirping, the distant crackle of a campfire, and a familiar whimper. Her eyes fluttered open. Max, with a groan of effort, Roxy lifted her heavy head. Her vision cleared just enough to make out the small form of her pup, curled up beside her, safe and sound. His tiny body trembled slightly from the ordeal, but his chest rose and fell steadily. He was alive. And then she saw him, the wild Mustang stallion standing only a few feet away. His coat shimmered gold under the filtered light, breaking through the clouds. The stallion stood tall and calm, as if rescuing a drowning puppy from a raging river was nothing out of the ordinary. Roxy tried to stand, her legs still weak from the fight against the river. She managed to sit up, her eyes locked on the magnificent animal before her. Who was the savior? The stallion took a slow step forward, lowering his massive head to gently nuzzle Max. The pup let out a small, contented whimper and pressed his tiny body closer to Roxy, his eyes fluttering shut again. In that moment, something shifted in Roxy's heart. She had spent her life believing that loyalty and courage belonged only to her kind or to humans she had served alongside in the military. Yet here stood a wild creature, untamed and free, risking his own life to save her pup. The storm had passed, but the ground remained soaked, the river still swollen with rain. For hours, the stallion stayed near, standing guard as Roxy recovered her strength. Despite every instinct from her years of training telling her to remain alert and cautious, she felt no fear. There was no threat in the stallion's presence, only an overwhelming sense of calm. As the sun began to set, the stallion turned his powerful body toward the hills in the distance. He paused, glancing back at Roxy with deep, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold a silent message. And then, without a sound, he galloped off toward the horizon, his golden form disappearing into the fading light. Roxy stood on shaky legs, her gaze following him until he was gone. She nuzzled Max gently, her heart still pounding with gratitude and awe. She couldn't help but wonder, why had that wild stallion risked everything to save her pup? How had he even known what to do? As darkness fell, Roxy knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no ordinary encounter. This was a reminder that courage, loyalty, and compassion could come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes those we least expect to save us arrive exactly when we need them most. With Max safely nestled against her side, Roxy began the slow journey back home under the light of the rising moon. Every step a silent promise that this incredible act of kindness would never be forgotten. By the time Roxy and Max made it back to the farm, dawn had broken over the Missouri landscape, painting the sky in warm shades of amber and rose. Every muscle in Roxy's body ached from the battle against the river, but the sight of Max sleeping peacefully against her side made every ounce of pain worth it. Days passed, but Roxy couldn't forget the stallion's eyes, how intelligent they were, how purposeful his actions seemed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that golden figure emerging from the storm like a living legend. Something inside her couldn't rest. And so, despite her lingering exhaustion, Roxy found herself standing at the edge of the pasture one morning, staring out the hills where the stallion had disappeared. Her sharp instincts told her this wasn't just a chance encounter. That stallion had a story, too. And perhaps, just like her, he was carrying wounds no one could see. Max trotted beside her now, his tiny legs stronger, his spirit unbroken despite the ordeal. But even in his youthful curiosity, he seemed drawn to the horizon, his nose lifting into the breeze, as if searching for the scent of their mysterious rescuer. Without hesitation, Roxy took her first step toward the hills. The journey was slow. Her strength hadn't fully returned, but there was a determination in her that not even the harsh sun or the rough terrain could break. Max kept pace beside her, his short legs working overtime to keep up with his mother's steady stride. They followed faint tracks, hoof prints imprinted in the soft earth, leading them deeper into the wild. With every mile, the world grew quieter. Civilization faded behind them, replaced by the raw, untouched beauty of rolling hills and wildflower-dotted meadows. After hours of walking, they reached a high ridge overlooking a hidden valley. And there he was. The golden stallion stood at the center of a small herd, his powerful frame unmistakable against the backdrop of the green valley. Mares and foals grazed peacefully nearby, their movements slow and content. But the stallion stood watch, his head held high, always alert, always protective. For a long time, Roxy stood motionless at the ridge, just watching. She understood now. This stallion was a leader, a guardian, not just of his own kind, but of anything vulnerable in his world. He had seen Max's struggle not as an inconvenience, but as a call to action. Suddenly, the stallion lifted his head and turned, his sharp eyes locking onto hers across the distance. In that single glance, it felt as if he spoke directly to her heart. "You would have done the same for me." Roxy felt something warm and unfamiliar swell in her chest. All her life, she had been trained to be strong, to protect and serve without hesitation. But here in the quiet wild, she witnessed that same unwavering courage in a creature who had never known human commands or praise, only instinct and an unbreakable sense of duty. Max let out a soft whimper and took a tentative step forward, his eyes wide as he looked at the herd below. The stallion responded by lowering his head gently, his body language calm and open, as if offering a silent welcome. For the first time, Roxy felt no need to rush back to the safety of the farm. She lay down on the grassy ridge, letting Max nestle against her once again. They would stay here for a while, under the watchful eyes of the wild herd. And as the sun dipped low and painted the valley in gold, Roxy realized something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Heroes didn't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they galloped wild and free across the hills. And sometimes the greatest acts of courage were the quietest, done without witness, without reward, simply because it was the right thing to do. That night, under the blanket of stars, Roxy felt more at peace than she ever had in her years of service. And as Max drifted off to sleep beside her, she knew deep down that her pup had already learned the most important lesson of all, not through her words, but through the silent bravery of a golden stallion who had shown them the true meaning of courage. The days that followed were the most peaceful Roxy had known since retiring from service. Each morning, she and Max climbed the ridge to watch the wild herd, their golden guardian always standing tall among them. The stallion, whom Roxy had come to think of as Valor, never ventured too close, but neither did he retreat. It was as if there was a silent understanding between them, one built not on language, but on shared experience. But peace, as Roxy had learned throughout her life, was always temporary. On the fourth night, a low rumble in the distance shattered the calm. The scent of smoke drifted on the wind, sharp and unmistakable wildfire. Roxy's instincts kicked, and immediately, her ears perked, and she rose to her feet, scanning the horizon. The orange glow was faint, but growing rapidly, carried by the dry summer winds. She turned to Max, nudging him urgently. It was time to move now. But as she herded Max toward the trail back home, a sharp whinny cut through the air. Valor stood at the crest of the hill, his eyes locked onto hers. Behind him, his herd grew restless, their silhouettes shifting nervously under the looming threat. For a moment, Roxy hesitated. Her protective instincts screamed to get Max to safety, but Valor's presence held her still. Then, without warning, the stallion reared high, his powerful front hooves striking the air before he turned and galloped toward the heart of the danger. Roxy's heart clenched. He wasn't running from a fire. He was running toward the scattered foes and stragglers trapped closer to the approaching flames. The decision was instant. Roxy barked sharply to Max, commanding him to stay put. The pup whimpered but obeyed, huddling low against a rock as his mother turned and sprinted after the stallion. Through the smoke and heat, Roxy kept pace as best she could, her lungs burning with each breath. The crackling flames grew louder, the sky darkening with thick clouds of ash. They found the stragglers near the base of a dry ravine, a pair of young foals trapped against a steep drop-off. Their terrified cries pierced the chaos. Valor moved with incredible control, positioning himself between the foals and the flames. He nudged them gently but firmly, guiding them up the narrow path toward higher ground. Roxy circled wide, using her powerful barks to drive the panicked foals forward. Together, the unlikely pair, a war-trained shepherd and a wild stallion, worked in perfect coordination. Just as the flames licked dangerously close to the path, the last foal scrambled to safety. Valor turned his head toward Roxy, and in his deep, knowing eyes, she saw something that left her breathless. Trust. The fire raged on behind them. But for the first time, Roxy felt something deeper than mere survival. She had faced battles, saved soldiers, and stood in the line of duty countless times. But nothing compared to this moment, standing side by side with Creature of the Wild, saving lives, not out of obligation, but out of something greater. As the fire crews finally arrived and the flames were brought under control, Roxy found her way back to Max, her legs trembling from exhaustion. The sun was rising again, casting golden light over a valley that had just survived destruction. Valor and his herd stood proudly atop the hill, silhouetted against the dawn. And though no words were spoken, Roxy understood what had passed between them. True courage isn't measured by the size of the enemy or the weight of the battle. It's found in the quiet moments when we choose to act selflessly, even when no one is watching. Max nuzzled against her side, his eyes wide with wonder as he looked up at her. Roxy lay down beside him, finally allowing herself to rest. And as her eyes drifted shut, one thought filled her heart. Heroes came in many forms. Some wore uniforms, and others ran wild and free, their hearts just as brave. The aftermath of the wildfire left a strange hush over the valley. charred or stretched like a scar across the once vibrant landscape. But amidst the destruction, life clung fiercely to what remained. Wildflowers pressed stubbornly through the blackened soil, and surviving herds gathered cautiously near the riverbanks, where the flames hadn't reached. Roxy and Max stayed close to the edge of the hills, returning to their quiet watch of Valor and his herd. Yet something was different now. The bond forged through fire, and danger ran deeper than any silent understanding. Each day, Valor would approach a little closer to where Roxy and Max waited. His powerful head would lower in greeting, and his dark eyes would linger on Max, as if checking on the pup's strength, as if silently approving of how he had grown. Max had indeed changed. He was no longer the fragile pup swept helplessly by the river. His legs had grown stronger, his steps more confident. But beyond that, his spirit had matured. He stood taller beside his mother now, his eyes filled with curiosity and courage far beyond his young age. Roxy knew that Max's survival had shaped him. But more than that, it was Valor's quiet heroism that left its mark. Then one morning, as the sun painted the valley gold, Roxy noticed something strange. Valor stood apart from his herd, gazing out toward the distant mountains. His posture was different, his head held high, nostrils flaring, as if the wind carried a message only he could understand. Without warning, he threw his head back and let out a low, powerful whinny that echoed through the valley. The herd responded immediately, gathering close as if preparing for something monumental. And then it happened. Valor turned, his massive hooves striking the ground with purpose, and began leading his herd away toward the mountains. Roxy's heart tightened. Max whined softly beside her, sensing that something significant was happening, something final. The great stallion had given his protection, his strength, and his courage when they needed it most. But his time here was done. He had saved Max. He had fought alongside Roxy, and now he was answering a call to something beyond this valley, something neither she nor Max could follow. Roxy stood and took a step forward, her eyes locked on a retreating figure, the golden stallion. Valor paused at the ridge one last time. Their eyes met across the distance. One final silent exchange. Thank you. Farewell. And just like that, he disappeared beyond the horizon, his herd following faithfully behind him. Max pressed close against his mother, his head tucked beneath her chin. Come on, little one, Roxy seemed to say through a soft nudge. It's time we find our way home, too. The walk back to the farm was quiet. As they crossed the familiar paths, Roxy thought about everything that had passed. Her life had once been defined by orders and missions, by the loyalty she showed to those who commanded her. But none of those years compared to what she had experienced here in the wild. She had learned more about courage from a wild stallion than from any battlefield. And Max, he had been given the greatest lesson of all. That true strength isn't about how big you are or how loud you roar, but about the heart you carry and the sacrifices you're willing to make. When they reached the farm, the familiar scent of home wrapped around them like a long-forgotten comfort. Max ran ahead toward the barn, his young voice echoing with playful barks, as if the weight of the past days had finally lifted. Roxy stood for a moment at the gate, looking out toward the horizon where Valor had vanished. Somewhere out there, under the endless sky, the great stallion ran free. She hoped the winds were gentle beneath his wings, and that he found green pastures where the fires of the world could never reach him again. With one final look, Roxy turned and made her way back toward the warmth of home. And though her journey with Valor had ended, the lessons he left behind would live on through every step she took. And in the brave, strong little pup trotting happily at her side, weeks turned into months, and the seasons shifted gently from summer to fall. Life on the farm settled into a peaceful rhythm. But for Roxy and Max, nothing was ever quite the same after that summer. Max had grown stronger, both in body and spirit. His legs were longer now, his chest broader, and his eyes carried a quiet wisdom far beyond his young age. Wherever Roxy went, Max followed faithfully. But unlike before, he didn't just follow. He led in his own small ways. One crisp autumn morning, the air thick with the scent of falling leaves and fresh earth, a sound of distress echoed from beyond the farm's fence line. Roxy's ears perked immediately. Max was already on his feet, his instincts sharper than ever. A panic bleating echoed again, A young lamb trapped in a thicket of thorn bushes along the edge of the nearby woods. Roxy sprinted toward the sound, but Max was faster. His lean, muscular frame darted through the trees with confidence and purpose. For a brief, terrifying moment, Roxy felt the sting of that day by the river, her heart pounding as she watched her son throw himself toward danger. But then she saw it. Max didn't hesitate. He crouched low, approached the terrified lamb slowly, using the calming, non-threatening posture his mother had taught him. Inch by inch, he drew closer until the lamb stopped thrashing. And then, with practiced precision, Max gently grabbed the lamb's scruff and began pulling it free from the tangled branches. Roxy arrived just as Max dragged the exhausted animal to safety. For a moment, she stood frozen, her heart swelling with pride and emotion so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. Max turned to her, his eyes glowing, his tail wagging. In that look, she saw it all. The courage of the wild stallion, the strength of his own spirit, and the lessons of loyalty and sacrifice he'd learned not from words, but from watching. Max had become his own kind of hero. Later that evening, as the sun set over the golden fields, Roxy lay under the old oak tree near the barn. Watching Max as he played gently with the rescued lamb, their friendship already forming. She thought of Valor, wondering where the great stallion was now. Did he stand proudly atop some far-off mountain, his mane flowing the wind, watching over a new herd? Or had he found peace in the quiet places of the world, his duty fulfilled, his legacy carried on in the most unexpected of places? A soft breeze swept through the trees, rustling the autumn leaves. Roxy closed her eyes and felt that familiar presence again. Not in body, but in spirit. Valor wasn't gone. He lived on in every brave act, in every moment of kindness and courage. And now, through Max, that legacy would continue. As night fell and the stars blanketed the sky, Roxy knew she could finally rest easy. The circle of courage was complete. Heroes, she realized, don't always stay. But their stories, their lessons, their spirit, those remain forever. And sometimes the greatest stories aren't told with words at all. They're lived. Winter arrived quietly that year. The air turned crisp, and a soft blanket of frost covered the farm each morning. Despite the cold, life continued with a steady grace. Roxy, now moving slow with the weight of her years, often watched Max from her favorite resting place near the old barn. He had grown into a strong, confident young shepherd, his coat thick and shining, his eyes full of life and purpose. But more than his physical strength, it was his spirit that made her proud. One snowy afternoon, as the sky threatened another heavy storm, something happened that would forever mark the final chapter of their incredible journey. A low hum of panic stirred through the farm animals. Roxy's ears perked despite her aching joints. Max was already on alert, his head raised high as a sharp, distressed cry echoed from beyond the farm's boundary. Without hesitation, Max took off, his powerful legs cutting through the snow. Roxy rose slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs as she followed behind, her mind racing with worry. Max sprinted toward the frozen edge of the old pond, a place Roxy had always avoided during the harsh winters. As she crested the final hill, the scene before her froze her blood cold. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, stood on the thin ice at the center of the pond. His face was pale with fear, his tiny frame trembling as cracked spiderweb beneath his feet. And Max was crawling low across the ice, moving carefully, each step calculated and precise. Roxy's breath caught in her throat. It was happening again. That terrible, helpless feeling she remembered from a river. The moment when she couldn't reach Max came rushing back with brutal force. But this time, it wasn't her fight. It was Max's. The boy let out a sharp cry as the ice groaned and sagged beneath him. Max barked low and steady, his calm presence cutting through the panic. Step by step, he reached the boy, nudging him gently, guiding him to lie flat and spread his weight. The pond creaked under their combined weight. But Max kept the boy focused, nudging him slowly toward the shoreline. Every instinct in Roxy screamed to intervene, to dash across the ice and drag them both to safety. But she knew she couldn't. This was Max's moment. Just like the day the wild stallion had plunged into the river to save him, Max now faced his own trial of courage. The minutes stretched like hours, the air thick with tension. And then, finally, the boy's outstretched hand grabbed hold of the bank. Max gave one final push, using his body as leverage to help the child scramble up to safety. As soon as the boy was secure, Max turned and made his way back towards solid ground, his legs slipping slightly, but his determination unwavering. When he reached Roxy, she pressed her nose into his fur, breathing in the scent of her brave son, pride and relief overwhelming her. The boy's parents came running moments later, their cries of gratitude filling the frozen air. And as they wrapped their arms around their son, holding him close, Roxy watched Max standing tall despite his trembling legs. He had done it. He had faced the impossible and found the courage to act, just like valor. Later that night, as the storm finally settled and the farm fell quiet under a blanket of snow, Roxy lay beside Max under the old oak tree. She gazed up at the winter sky, the stars burning bright against the dark velvet night. And for a moment, she saw him again, Valor, standing tall on some distant ridge, his golden coat glowing under sky just like this one. She imagined his eyes meeting hers one final time, filled with pride, not for what she had done, but for what she had passed on. Max curled against her, his breath warm in the cold night air, his body strong and at peace. Roxy closed her eyes, knowing her journey was complete. She had lived with honor, fought with courage, and loved with every part of her heart. But most of all, she had given the world a new protector. And that was the greatest legacy of all. If this story inspired you, remember, courage and loyalty live on long after we're gone. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories just like this one.